Hello and welcome to this painting demonstration of Connemara in the far west of Ireland. Now I am an ambassador for the Princeton brush company and I'll be using Princeton brushes throughout the demonstration. The two series that I really like to use are the Neptune and the Aqua Elite. Now, both of these series are fully synthetic brushes, but they're better than any synthetic brush I've ever used. And I'll be using these for most of the painting. The Neptune range is synthetic squirrel, so they hold plenty of paint and have really soft hair, so they apply the paint really gently. The Aqua Elite is synthetic Kolinsky, so they're a little bit springier and they're ideal when I want to make some more precise marks. Now I'll be using these brushes for most of the painting, but I'll let you know a little bit later on all about the other ones that I'll be using then. I'll be painting on Saunders Waterford paper, and Saunders Waterford paper is, this is the white version, which is quite creamy, but they also do a high white version which is slightly whiter, and this is a rough texture, which is good for this type of landscape. My paint is my Mary Blue watercolor, which is made in Italy, obviously artist quality, and I use a fairly standard twin primary system, so I use a warm and a cool version of blue, red and yellow, and a couple of other ones. So I've got sort of basically ultramarine and cyan phthalo blue. I have Pyrrole red, sandal red as it's known in my Mary Blue, quinacridone magenta, and my two yellows are, I'm just going to call those warm yellow and cool yellow, because it doesn't really matter which one, which you use, which warm or which cool yellow, they do much the same thing. A few other little ones here too. We've got burnt sienna, cobalt blue, brown madder, which is rather nice to use, some white, which I use occasionally. Whether I use it today or not, I don't know, and a little bit of Naples yellow. We want a sort of grey, so we'll get a basic grey. And I also use some cobalt blue while I'm doing this. Keep dipping, so do not keep on with the brush until it completely runs out of colour. If you do that, things will dry and it will not be good. So I'm just looking for a slightly varied grey blue sky area. As I say, I'll bring this right down. Keep dipping, remember. The buildings will be darker than the mountains behind, but I'll just soften it a little bit so I don't get any awkward drying marks. Same as here. Don't mind that, because that's going to be the actual border between the hills and the water. Now I want some slightly stronger paint now, and I'm just going to use this to get some slightly darker clouds into the damp sky. So the sky is damp, and I'm just going to bring this in a little bit. Could be doing with being slightly damper actually, so I'm just going to give it a quick spray. That's better. Spray just to help it along. And I can also use a little bit of kitchen paper just to lift out some lighter areas of cloud. So just using it almost like a little brush. rather than pushing it hard. Pushing it hard tends to just take too much paint off, whereas I think it gives more interesting control when it's done like this. So a little bit of variety in the sky. We've even got a little bit of a storm cloud there, but that's okay. And just dry up that drip at the bottom, and I think that's probably enough for our sky. So I can continue on down the rest of the paper. So back to some blue. It's quite a dark area of sea there, but I'll get this in just to begin with, and then it's really all about the sort of earthy colours of the landscape. So again, just varying these a little bit. And I'm not really thinking about actual plants or anything at this point. It is all just getting some interesting colour on. That's all it is. So it all runs together. We don't have any issues with hard edges, just in there. I don't want that to be a hard edge. This is a barely damp brush that I'm just going in there just to soften things a little bit. I'm using the mixtures of colours that I've made up there and just completing the wash down to the bottom. Now for the background mountains, I want these to be really quite bluish. So I'm adding a little bit of that cobalt blue into that green just to really blue it a little bit. And I'll get some purer blue. And I'll use that for the very distant hills or distant mountains. And I'll use that slightly, well, there's not a huge amount of difference, but there's a little bit of difference there. Again, as few brush strokes as possible, but painting wet, painting really wet. Because painting wet means that you will get smooth washes. Now that gives us the background mountains, but I can also change things a little bit back there. I don't want to do anything too complicated back there because it is in the distance. It is so easy to end up with really much too much detail and background, so I'm trying to avoid this. Just wanting to get a little bit of slightly warmer greyish colour here, and we'll get that in just a little bit closer in places, and it's just to hint at the variation in the mountains. This is to try to hint at the sunlight. So there is sun's coming from the right. So we're getting a little bit of variation on these hills, but nothing too much. Always important to make sure that the paint you're adding is stronger than the paint that is already there. If it isn't, you will end up getting cauliflowers when you're painting into damp areas. I'm almost getting it there, so I'm just strengthening up that wash just a little bit. I think that's probably enough. Gives us enough interest in in the mountains. Now my sea is really very, very dark, so I need dark blue. And I can get a dark blue very simply, like this. So this burnt sienna will automatically darken the ultramarine. Yeah, it's okay. And I'm leaving a little sort of pale strip back there, and that's really just to hint at the beaches on the far side. Now there are a lot of little fence posts back here, and these could be done, in fact they'd probably be easier done just with white gouache, but you can paint around them, so you could do things like that, but maybe do them with white gouache later, because the problem is anything that takes time causes problems with the wash, so it's best to avoid these problems with the wash. Now that's my sea, maybe slightly darker than I was expecting, but always remember things need to be slightly darker than you want them to be because they're going to dry lighter. They always do. Okay, continuing on then. Need to get some of the vegetation in, so I want to get a little bit more variation in my in the grass and things like that. So I'm just going to use the same mix that I'd made before. And I'm really just trying to do a few little splashes of colour just to hint at, as I say, at the variation that we get back here. Trying to join it together as far as possible because you're much better with a few big interesting shapes than lots of little tiny shapes. So trying to make sure we keep that. I want to get a hint of a little laneway running up here. No, that's okay, but it's a bit too many lines, so I'm just going to use my little softening brush here, just barely damp, and that will just simplify that a little bit. And some stronger colour for the closer part. And again, I'm trying to hint at the sort of roughness of the grass without really getting too bogged down in detail. That's really what I suppose what I fear is too much detail. I don't want a lot of detail. Back here we've got trees and we've got little plants and things, gorse bushes with some yellow flowers, so we can get some yellow on that. And then the rest back to the green. And I want this to be quite dark at the bottom, so I'm going to add in some more of this sort of dark mix that I had before. By reusing these previously mixed washes, it means that we get a sort of harmony in the painting, so things match up. Whereas using completely different colours in different parts of the painting often causes a few issues. Get that slightly darker on the left side, slightly lighter on the right side. Again, just maybe lighten it a little bit more. That's better. A little bit more variety in there. I'm going to leave that little sharp edge at the bottom because that will hint at the trees then becoming grass again. A little wall in here. Too dark. I'll dilute that a little bit. and lots of little posts on it. Well, I don't think there are that many posts on it in reality, but I thought it might look interesting. Little wall, and then into the foreground field area. So once again, just that same mixture that I've been using. Perhaps just dampen that a little bit so that then I can paint my green into it and I'll automatically get softness, which is what I want, at least in part. And at the bottom here, again, just a hint at the unevenness of the grass. I don't want to do too many little marks like this. That becomes a little bit too much, but I'm wanting to hint at that rather than actually do it. I know that might sound a bit strange, but it's all to do with hinting and suggestion. And it's easy to overdo this, so again, I'm going to be careful not to do too much. I'm going to pick up some more of that dark, and I'm just going to drop that dark into some of the areas of my grass. And this is again purely for interest. Those little bits of extra colour all help. Okay. In the Aqua Elite range, Princeton also do this little set of travel brushes, and these are really good, obviously for traveling, but useful for all sorts of things. And it means the brush is always kept protected. Now I'm going to use the size 10 here they go right down. I think there's 10, 8, 6 and 4. And I'm going to use the size 10 for the sort of final little details. So first of all, for the rooftops of the buildings are white, but they've got grey rooftops. So I'm going to again just use that same mix to get me a grey. That's not going to work because I need that top of the roof to be contrasting against the mountains behind. So I think I'll just dampen that and drop a little bit of that colour in so that I get the colour, or the tone rather, the value, for the bottom part of the roof, but I don't have to worry about the top part. A bit too much there, so again, clean that off. So notice the way I can use the roof, I can make the roof be light at the top and dark at the bottom. Now the tip on this brush makes these little precise marks. Very, very simple to do. And then a little bit lighter for the side. And lighter again for the distance. There weren't really a lot of windows and whatnot in this, but I'm going to put a couple of little windows in. Remember, you're painting a picture, you are not copying reality. A couple of little windows, that will do. Now there needs to be a little bit of shadow in that will come later. Telegraph poles. Telegraph poles, same mixture will do. And I can use the fine point in this and just, some people do this very quickly, but I actually find if it's done quite slowly, it actually works better. And the bottom part of the pole, I want that to disappear. So I'm just going to let that disappear into the vegetation. A little bit more. That's deliberately at a slight angle. I think it actually is at a slight angle in the actual subject. But again, it gives a bit of variation. Now we'll get a few really strong darks in. There's some shadows. Maybe get the shadows in first. And for the shadows, I'm going to use a mix of the ultramarine and the brown matter. And I'm just going to do a very simple shadow wash, that's all, nothing too complicated. Maybe it's slightly less strong than that. That'll need to be dark in there too, so I'll have to think of a way of separating those a little bit later. But we'll be able to do that. A little bit of shadow under the eaves. And then some extra little bits of shadow as well. So in my trees, plants, things like that, just little splashes of colour. Just to make it interesting. Another little building back there. It's not of very much interest, but it is there. And then lots more fence posts. Fence posts everywhere. Now I have to be careful here. I don't want to put too much in. I don't want to put in unnecessary detail. So for example, I'm not going to bring these fence posts all the way down to here because it will divert the eye away from the buildings, which is really where I want the eye to stay. My wall here, again, I just want to get a little bit of variation in that. And indeed on my grass too. Now one thing you can do that can work quite well is a little bit of a darker shadow along the bottom can really help to keep the light in the center of the painting. So I'm just going to go back to my larger brush, the quill brush, and get a little bit more of that shadow. And it's a bit weak now. Just strengthen it up slightly. Bit more. I like the warm in the foreground, so just a little bit more of the brown matter in there. Shadow would be rough, it's over rough ground. Remember, keep dipping your brush back into your paint. You want lots of paint in your brush so that it flows off the brush. You should never have to scrub. If you find you're scrubbing with your brush, you're doing two things. First of all, you're wearing away your brush, although these Princeton brushes actually take a lot of abuse. I've been using this one for months and months and months. Look at the point, it's still there on it. A few little more of these is say keep it slightly rough. And that's just hinting at something casting a shadow from the right hand side. All it is doing really is just providing a little bit more interest in our foreground, I suppose. Now I'm going to mix up a really strong dark mix. That's ultramarine burnt sienna. And I just want to use this just to get a few little extra marks on my poles here. Again, just purely for variety. A little bit of extra variety. I still need to do a little bit with this building because there's 3 walls there, so I'm just going to darken that one a little bit, the middle one. That'll separate it from the other 2. There we go, simple as that. Over here, this little building is quite a dark color and tone, so we'll get something in there. That'll do fine. Even little things like these windows, again, just little bits of extra dark in there, but not over everything, so that we get variety. So it's not always just the same tone, it's lots of little hints of different tones. Now finally I'm going to use, this is another Aqua Elite brush, and this is the rigger, size 10 rigger, so it's nice long hair, perfect for twigs and things like that. And I just want to get a little bit of light just down the sunlit part of that, particularly where it passes over the dark sea behind. Same thing here, a little bit there. Same thing here. And same thing over here. Now it's almost imperceptible, but it does help. Now if you remember from back at the beginning, these little fence posts that I painted round, and I was saying that you can just use white and it'll do much the same job. And it does. And of course the starkness of that tiny amount of white against the dark sea beyond really adds to the contrast. And you know what? The thing about painting is there is absolutely no way of determining when the painting is finished. But a good way of determining it, I think, is when you really can't think of much else to do, well then probably that's a good time to stop. So I hope you enjoyed that, folks. I really enjoyed painting that for you using my Princeton brushes. They're really good brushes. You should check them out. Bye bye.